The Old Beach House, written by the Prowler. Nestled between the dunes on the beaches of Maine sits a house, two-story and painted blue. It's intact, but weathered from time. It's known to the locals of Cutter's Bay Village as the house at Sandy Point. At one time, the old beach house was a beautiful piece of architecture, belonging to the wealthiest family in the village. But now it is old and somewhat run down. It's been abandoned for decades now, and is rumored by many to be haunted, even cursed, maybe both. They say it happened after the wealthy family that lived there was butchered one stormy night. No one was ever charged with the heinous act, and the case remains unsolved to this day, some 40 years later. One eerie element to the incident, besides the horrific murders, is the lack of evidence to the murderer's presence altogether. No signs of another person, no traces, no clues, and on the night of the murders, the storm was so great that there was no earthly way a person could make their way through it. Visibility was next to none, and the rain and winds were so powerful that it destroyed half the luxurious homes on the beach. It truly was the worst storm that ever hit the village. But somehow, a murderer was able to make their way to the house, and after butchering the family, was able to flee into the storm unharmed. But how? Since that horrible incident, whoever has spent a night in the old beach house has never made it to morning. A few families tried to move in, but the longest they ever lasted was 10 hours. And any weary traveler or stranded fisherman looking for refuge from a storm, or the teenagers of the village daring each other to spend the night, also never lasted for more than a few hours. They all complain of the same thing. It's haunted. Every person who has stepped foot in the beach house has experienced the same things. They describe experiencing the horrific night the family was murdered. They all describe in great detail of the events the family went through, all claiming to hear the horrible incident play out as if they were in the house on that tragic night. The stories start with the people entering the abandoned beach house and usually starting a fire. Trying to get warm from the stormy beach night. Once the fireplace is going, lighting the darkened living room with its soft, fiery glow, the individual or individuals begin to sit and try to relax, or some try and go to sleep, all hoping to just make it through the storm and leave in the morning. Not long after they settle down, however, the horror begins. The front door violently swings open, immediately frightening whoever is staying there. They leap up and run from the living room to the foyer and see the front door open, but no one is there. They assume it was just the violence of the storm that jarred it open, which they can see raging outside through the open frame. As they quickly close the door, however, they hear heavy footsteps walk past them. Heading towards, then walking up the stairs. But once again, no one is there. The individual who is experiencing this strangeness chalks it up to frazzled nerves and tiredness, and decides to call it a night. So they head back to the living room and lay themselves by the warmth of the fireplace. The soft flickering glow begins to usher them to sleep. But as their eyelids begin to close, that's when they hear a blood-curdling scream. Echo into the stormy night. Bedroom doors swing open and slam shut. Screams of "No! Please don't!" ring out, followed by menacing laughter and a low-pitched voice screaming,
"You're all going to die."
Then running can be heard across the floorboards of the second floor from room to room, followed by more screaming, then the low-pitched voice again screaming,
"Come here!"
The sounds that follow afterwards can only be described by many as an axe or some kind of sharp instrument cutting and ripping into wet flesh. Moans of pain follow, then that horrible menacing laugh. Then silence, which is quickly broken by the sounds of something heavy and wet being dragged across the floorboards to the master bedroom, and the door violently being slammed shut. Whoever is in the living room explains being in a complete state of fear, trembling in place. Just then they feel a drop hit their face. They think at first it's probably a leak from the storm. They wipe their cheek, expecting to see water, but to their horror, they see it's blood. They jerk their heads up toward the ceiling and see pools of blood forming, which begin to drip along with blood running down the walls of the room. When the master bedroom door flies open and a crack of lightning rings out, making whoever is staying at the old beach house jump up and flee into the night storm. Most don't even take the time to collect their things. The beach house remains abandoned, and after learning why, I think you can understand the reason. You can't convince a single local that that beach house on Sandy Point isn't haunted, or to stay there. Yes, there's rumors of it being a rite of passage among the teens of the village to make it through the night at the beach house, but it is frowned upon by the elders of the village. So now, knowing what you know, do you think you have the courage? If you're out on the beaches of Maine and get caught in a storm near Sandy Point, will you be brave enough to stay the night at the old beach house? Honey's at the Beach by Simba the Savage 8 and psyopticnerve. She is the most beautiful creature I have ever experienced. Her hair shines in the moonlight, luscious, golden locks, as blonde as the cornfield back home. She is perched on a rock, her silver gaze fixed on us, and oh, she sings, smooth and sweet as honey, each note being played on an invisible harp. If an angel came down from heaven and turned mortal, it would be this girl right here. "Honey," she whispers, and I find that I am drawn to her every word, like a moth to a flame, as they say. She gets off the rock and comes closer. No, glides across the ground, so gracefully, like a swan across water. I am rooted to the spot, my mouth open like an idiot. I can see her lips up close, ruby red. "I love you." She kisses me lightly on the cheek, and my heart explodes into a million pieces. I'm giggling like a teenager again. "Let's dance." And so we do, her arms around my waist, mine around her shoulder, swaying to the crash of the wind and sea, and illuminated by the full moon. But the more we dance, the more we sway, the more I realize that something is not quite right. Is it how the sea moans, and the wind howls, and the night frowns on us all? Or is it the way my partner is smiling at me with way too many teeth? Fangs? They seem to be growing longer, her face shifting and changing to my worst nightmare? Do you know something? She purrs, her voice shifting the same way her features seem to, from demonic to angelic, caught somewhere between the lines that she continues to blur. My mind follows suit, and the words that come from me seem to have fallen from my lips before I can understand them. Tell me. You, she breathes, taking my hand and holding it to her chest, now radiating a beauty that is nearly blinding. Taste like honey. Her jaws unhinge. Rows of teeth are displayed for a moment before they crunch through the bones of my fingers. Before I have a moment to fathom the pain, she is suckling from the wound, drinking my blood. Screaming, agony exploding in my brain as another bite takes what is left of my hand. She holds a finger to my lips, gently shushing me, sapphire eyes holding me captive. Honey, honey, please, she whispers, gently swaying with me as gore erupts onto her form. Just dance with me. She smiles with her ruby-stained lips, and I know in that moment there is nowhere else I'd rather be. The Woman at the Beach by 1001 Nights. Charles and Katie fumbled with the blankets and the flask of hot chocolate in the dark parking lot. The local beach was only a 20-minute drive from downtown, yet it felt like a long journey. City noises were replaced by the sound of waves, and the streetlights by the twinkling distant stars. It's darker than I thought, said Katie, her voice betraying fear. She was a big city girl, unlike Charles, who had grown up in nearby suburbs and knew the area well. Stargazing on the beach was his idea. He loved cuddling up in the cool ocean breeze, wrapped in blankets, listening to the healing waves and looking at the stars, reminded of their place in the universe. It was Katie's first time. She looked around at the tall, inky bushes and grasses etched out against the night sky. Come on, sweetheart, coaxed Charles. Other people are here, too. He gestured to a couple of other parked cars. Katie didn't want to be a wuss. Smiling up at Charles, they walked down a wooden boardwalk, connecting the parking lot to the beach. A particularly large wave crashed. Katie shivered. Taking that as a cue, Charles put his arm around her and pulled her closer. The salty tang seemed heavier in the night air. Despite the parked cars, no one was there. Here, sweetie. Charles poured hot chocolate carefully. Katie took a big sip. Ow! She cried as a hot liquid burned the roof of her mouth. Careful! Sorry, should have warned you." Katie didn't say anything. Charles lay back and tried to pull her down next to him. "Come on, let's look up at the stars." But Katie sat up stiffly, cupping her hands around the cup. The heat felt good in the breeze. Charles plucked at her arm. "Katie," in a low voice. Katie had turned around. The silhouette of a woman standing at the end of the boardwalk, gazing out at the ocean, her long hair stirring, was clearly visible. The wind dropped. The waves and bushes paused. Dead silence. The woman stepped lightly from the boardwalk onto the soft, dry sand and began walking towards them. "Hey," said Charles, but she continued without looking at them, her eyes fixed ahead on the waves, her pace not faltering. As she passed them, her bare foot, hardly visible in the starlight, hit the flask. The flask stayed steady. Her foot went straight through. The woman continued her stride towards the waves, now stepping on the damp sand. "Hey!" cried out Charles. They both stumbled up and reached out uselessly to the woman, the cold northern waves already up to her knees. "No!" screamed Katie, as the woman vanished under the glinting starlit waves. The couple stood still. Then, with shaking hands, Charles took out his cell phone and turned on the flashlight. He held the glaring light over the beach, where the woman had just walked across to her death. They stared at the smooth expanse of damp sand, unmarked by any footprints. Down in One by TheButterMouse. We always had to show off when drinking. Something stupid, like climbing a fire escape or running between traffic. This had been the case since our early teens, but everything got out of hand after we hit 30. Perhaps it was desperation, a chance to prove we still had bottle in the face of our upcoming middle age. Whatever the reason, our bluster sealed my fate. On each of the group's birthday, we made them a dirty pint. On that special day, you had to down a glass of something alcoholic and disgusting. The first was beer-laced, with a duo of spirits. This evolved so that the stronger drinks became the baseline. Our creations were the result of high spirits, and mostly ended with some slaps on the back and a splash of vomit. But then we got more inventive. A raw egg, hair from a shaven head, the contents of a tin of sardines, all in the glass and down the hatch. When it got to be my 36th year of life, I knew we were close to a tipping point. A sense this was the culmination of our adventures. So I booked a beach house for us on a July weekend. My challenge appeared on the second afternoon. We stood in swimming trunks on the cusp of the water. A cooler formed a makeshift table, the vessel on the plastic top. But what confused me was the glass was empty. Were they going to smash it into my face? My oldest friend went over to lapping waves and filled the glass. He held up the results of his action. The seawater was hazy, with grains of sand speckling the bottom. A few locks of seaweed floated near the rim. Yesterday, I had read an article on coastal pollution, but this was not a situation with choice. I had to drink. My gullet burned with the horrible goat's cheese stink of the ocean. Every part of my body screamed to reject this intruder. but I had to keep the seawater down. This was my final challenge. Soon I had an empty pint glass. I held my trophy aloft, and everyone cheered with approval. So now, I need to survive. Hold down that bubbling cauldron of vomit until the beach house. I have managed to keep the seawater down, despite my raging thirst. But the world is turning green, a bright emerald color, like the sea and sky have reversed. And my neck itches. I scratch and discover a rubbery texture near my Adam's apple. The gaps between my fingers are thick with webbed skin. My friends are not cheering anymore. They are shouting, but their words are incomprehensible, like burbling bubbles. I am so pleased to discover my thirst has vanished. In fact, I fancy another glass of seawater. No Shells on the Beach by Justadair. Let's see. We've got our pails and shovels. Our lunches are packed in the cooler. The floaties are in the back. We've got towels. Mommy is sitting in the front seat. Seems like everything's in the car, Jake exclaimed emphatically. I guess I'll just drive away now. Daddy, Jessica said, giggling and rolling her eyes a little. I'm not in my seat, the 3-year-old scolded. You, he said, sweeping her into the air and swinging her. How could I forget you? He said, laughing. You're the reason we're going to the beach at all today. I want to collect shells, she said while he nestled her safely into her seat. He buckled her in, gave her chubby leg a pinch, and said gravely, Not today, sweetie. Then, in an enthusiastic tone, he continued, Today is just for making sandcastles and eating sandwiches. At this, he crooked his hand and cackled. Ew, she said. I don't want to eat witches, she said, scrunching up her face. Laughing, Laura peered at her daughter and said, What? Sandwiches are the most delicious. Jake closed the door to the family Volvo and drove off. At the beach, Jake waddled along the path that cut through the grass and led to the sandy shore. Laura held Jessica, who was wiggling to get free. Stop now, we're almost there, she told her daughter sharply. Looking out at the deserted beach, she asked, Are you sure this is free, Jake? Inhaling the salted air deeply, he replied, This is the one your brother told us about, remember? He said they'd just done a sweep. Look, there's a good spot. He shrugged in the direction of the shoreline, and they sat down their towels, trowels, buckets, and cooler. Slowly, as time marched on, like the soldier it is, they relaxed under blue skies as puffball clouds did their slow explosions above. They dug trenches in the sand, reaching out to the ocean, and watched as the waves washed into the moat they'd created around the fortress-like castle they'd built. After lunch, they drowsed together, and their imaginations removed them briefly from reality as they lay there, nestled against one another. Just before succumbing to sleep, Jake saw Jessica smack her soft lips with eyes closed, then nap, mouth agape as children do. Neither of the parents knew how much time had passed, but a breeze cooled the sweat in the hollow between them. They woke, realizing that their daughter was no longer with them. They got up quickly, shaking sand and sleep from their heads as they looked around. "She's there," Laura said, directing Jake's attention some 100 meters down the beach. Jessica could be seen waving her arms excitedly. Her voice was thin and tinny from the distance, but they could just make out her saying, "I found one." They began running as she picked up the shell. "No!" they screamed simultaneously. But alas, the piece of artillery burst into red mist. A Raging Thirst by TheButterMouse. Pubs in seaside towns have an extra layer of magic. Even in this urban environment, they have an intrinsic connection to nature. Maybe pubs in the mountain contain this atmosphere too, but something about a windswept alley by a darkened beach on a winter's night is enchanting. The moment of switching from the freezing sea air to fireside warmth and the smell of beer cannot be beaten. You must remember how close these pubs are to the edge of the land. Walk 500 meters to the right, and you end deep within the water. Or indeed, you can go the other way. Some visitors from below are curious to find out what lies above. They brave the stinging pebbles and burning sand, and crawl across the rough concrete to satisfy curiosity. If you had undertaken that torrid journey, would you not want to seek out warmth and companionship? This may be part of where the concept of ghosts originated. They are surreptitious, and the good thing about seaside pubs is they contain lots of nooks and crannies. Many have old barrels and knotted ropes to hide behind. The visitors are close to human form, and lumps and bumps can hide under shawls and blankets. No one bothers the odd-looking person drinking stout in the corner. If you look closely, you can spot scales on the wrist, or the flick of gills beneath the ears. You will see a twitch of tentacle underneath gray socks. The seaside pub is a magic place, but be mindful of any newcomers. This may be their first night of drinking. We shouldn't have ignored the signs at a private beach. Deleted author. My family had a private beach we'd visit every summer, about an hour's drive down the main road to an unmarked dirt path. We'd found it while searching for a restroom, and with not so much as an outhouse in sight, my dad had driven our old station wagon off the nearest exit to let me pee in a bush. The entrance was full of rusted old signs, some barely legible from decades of weathering. "Private property, keep out. No trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted," they'd shout, like crotchety old men waving their canes. Old men we ignored while we played in the sand, too sick of the road to search for parking at a crowded beach another 20 miles out. It was our own little playground where none would disturb us, a stretch of beach long forgotten by locals and tourists alike. Breaking the smoothness of the wave-worn shores with our footprints felt magical, like the first stroke of paint on a blank canvas. My sister and I would search for treasures in colorful tidal pools, grubby fingers grasping in the crystal-clear water for shells long abandoned, driftwood and coins from distant lands. The sea's bounty was vast, and we were the ones to claim it. When the sun had set and our hands were white and wrinkled, we'd bundle up in towels and join our parents by the light of a crackling fire. Dad would recount stories about his surfer days, and we'd sit, surrounded by warmth, love, and plenty of marshmallows. It was our secret haven, a pristine shore unspoiled by man. It was because of these memories that when it came my turn to plan the family reunion, I chose our private beach as the resort. We packed coolers full of watermelon, a grill, wieners, beach balls, towels, and some plastic digging tools for a sandcastle contest. It had been over 15 years, but eventually we found the same old beach with the same old signs we ignored in the same old ways. Mom and Dad settled down in their lawn chairs in the shade, while I herded my family towards the campsite to help with the tent. Around sunset, it was time for the bonfire, and John, my brother-in-law, was nowhere to be seen. I remembered him taking the kids out to see the tidal pools and asked them if they knew where he was. Giggling, they replied that they buried him up to his neck in sand over by the big rocks. Squinting, we could just barely make out the spot where his head poked out, shielded from the sun by a goofy straw hat. With a sigh and an eye roll, my sister and I set out to dig up her husband. As we got closer, he shouted something, but we couldn't quite make it out against the roar of the ocean waves. He kept shouting, tossing sand into his mouth and knocking off his hat. "Hang tight! We'll get you out," we called back, and quickened our pace to a jog. Out of the corner of my eye, I spied something moving in the craters of sand we kicked up. The shouting stopped by the time we reached him. John's head leaned back against the sand, eyes unfocused in a glassy stare. I slapped him. No response. We dug at him urgently, me with the pail and my sister with the shovel. She jumped back. Hundreds, if not thousands, of squirming, worm-like creatures were eating John's body. They crawled in and out of the tunnels they bored through his flesh, wriggling as we brushed them off with the plastic tools and curling up on contact with the ground. Their pale inch-long bodies pulsed darkly as they lapped up his blood. I whipped out my cell phone light to get a better look, but they made a strange buzzing sound and retreated, tunneling beneath his skin, jerking his rib cage this way and that. We left him half buried and ran back, shouting at everyone to get into the cars, where we called the police. When they got there, they took one look at John and made another call. A couple of guys in hazmat suits showed up and took him away. While we waited, I reread the signs by the entrance, finding a faded yellow notice we'd missed. Warning: this property is condemned by the authority of the State Police Department. Beach House, author unknown. In late June of 2019, I took a vacation trip with my friend and his family to a beach house on the Florida coast. We expected a nice, relaxing, and fun vacation. Instead, we got one of our worst nightmares. It was around 11 p.m. when I decided to go to bed on our first day there. Only a few hours later, I woke up to the sound of shuffling on the left side of the house. I got up and was confused because all of the lights were off, and all the doors were closed, so clearly everyone was asleep. I went around and saw nothing throughout the whole house. But as soon as I was about to lay back in my bed, a massive stomp from right above my room woke up the whole house. I told everyone that I heard the stomp from above the ceiling, but we all just assumed it was nothing to worry about. Great. The next morning it was pouring rain, so we could not go to the beach when we were intending to. For the whole day we were pretty much just sitting and watching TV or on our phones all day. For the second night in a row, I woke up in the middle of the night to the same shuffling sounds. I could hear it going from one end of the house to the other. I wasn't the only one to be woken up, though. My friend also heard the shuffling and was confused. We both thought it was an animal with a shelter in the roof, but we just wanted to make sure what was actually going on. There was no way a little animal would make such a loud stomp from the previous night. Me and my friend found the entrance to the attic and climbed our way up. As soon as I turned on my flashlight, I was met with pure fear. When I lit up the flashlight, I did not see a living being, but I saw a pentagram, seemed to be drawn with blood, a mattress with a sleeping bag, a food stash that looked to be stolen from our pantry, and multiple dead birds. The next day before we left, we found tiny peepholes in the ceiling above each and every single bed. I would like to give a heartfelt thank you to the special friends of the channel for your overwhelming generosity. If you would like to support the channel, the link is below in the description. Also, please send me your stories and poems to duchessofdarkness27@gmail.com. You can also find me on Instagram at duchess.ofdarkness and Twitter at duchessofdarkn2. I want to thank all my listeners for your kindness, your encouragement, and your support. It means the world to me. Thank you for joining me. Until next time.